Creek Week! Hey, welcome everybody to the Creek this week. I'm Rick, and this is a production of AC3 where we exist to lead spiritual but not religious people to become fully devoted followers of Christ. And if you know any spiritual but not religious people, you probably already know their ethical framework. And in these days, we tend to think that maybe Christians are diverging from the culture more and more and more in terms of our ethical outlook. But the truth is that we are still very, very unified on a bunch of really, really key things. Things like equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, and progress. Like we're kind of all in on all those things. But here's what is less known, is where those things came from. So we're in a series right now called The Air We Breathe, or This Changes Everything, is where we started last week on Easter. And the idea in this series is just that all those amazing things that form our ethical framework came from Jesus. Like, it's really not an exaggeration at all to say that those things were definitely not presumed to be part of a good ethical framework before Jesus. And that's how we know Jesus changed the ballgame. Think about it. What you assume to be as sort of self-evidently true, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Imagine you were living in the first century. And would you say that these truths are self-evident? Equality? I can tell you this for a fact. If you just read a little bit of Aristotle, a little bit of Socrates, you realize that equality was not self-evident. In fact, the one thing that was most self-evident to them about human nature was that human beings were not equal. That was the most self-evident thing to those cats. Jesus comes along, changes the ball game, and then about 18 centuries later, somebody in the West can say it's self-evident that everybody's created equal. like how? How did that change? How was there such a seismic change in what we consider to be a true and good and beautiful ethical framework? The answer is Jesus. I'll give you another example, and we'll look into this in the coming week. Science. Like, we often think that science is a thing that arose from the Enlightenment, and that the Enlightenment itself was sort of like this harsh sort of reaction against the medieval dark ages that the Christians brought in and brought us into this dark, terrible 1,000 years where all the great ideas of Rome, we could get into the great ideas of Rome, were all lost and forgotten for 1,000 years. And then finally, the anti-religious people picked up the torch of knowledge and reason and enlightenment and put those terrible dark ages that the Christians brought aside. If you have heard this story before in a classroom, it is almost completely wrong. Completely wrong. Google the myth of the Dark Ages, and what you'll realize is that what was happening in the Dark Ages was that Christian scholastics, what they called natural theologians, were basically laying the groundwork for what we now know of as the discipline of science. In fact, every single one of the early practitioners of science were Christian men of deep Christian faith. And the question is that an accident, or is there a reason why science arose, and only once in the history of the world, because it's never going to rise again, we have it now, it arose only once, and it arose in the Christian West. Is that a fluke, or is it a reason? And what we're going to find out in this series is that there's a reason for that. And the reason is grounded in a Christian worldview that Jesus essentially made popular to the entire world, because the great disciple-making mandate of his spread this biblical idea about creation that became the fertile soil from which science sprung. You say, well, what was that fertile idea? The fertile idea was this. It was that creation was a handiwork of God. So in other words, the ancients did not believe, again, considering some things to be self-evident, the ancients believed it was self-evidently true that the universe was eternal, that the stuff of the universe, its basic building blocks, were basically the stuff, the primordial ooze and chaos from which emerged the gods. The gods were born. In Christianity, this is exactly flipped. And it comes obviously out of Judaism and out of Christianity. And Jesus is the one who basically launched this Jewish idea out into the world. And it's the idea that mind comes before matter. In all pagan and polytheistic systems, matter comes first, then comes the mind of the gods, and from the gods, people, and then from people you get design and so forth. Christian story flips this thing around. It says, no, not matter first, it says mind first. How did that change the ballgame for science? Well, think about it. If the creation, think about it, if the creation is just sort of like the result of sort of chaotic spasms, and then people are made from spats in the heavens, literally like the blood-soaked wars in the heavens, and from them, you know, from the bodily fluids, in some cases literally of the gods, people are made, then nature is not something to be studied, right? Nature is just sort of a thing to be dealt with. It's sort of a thing to be grappled with, prepare yourself against it. It's chaotic, it's noisy, it's dangerous, and just make your way in the world. That's the best you get. But if nature is the work of a mind, then it would correspond to reason, and it would have categories that you could study it, and it would have patterns, and you could find what its patterns were. That was a Christian idea. And so it basically presented to us a creation not as chaotic, messy soup from which the gods emerged. It presents to us like a clock. And a clock could be studied for patterns, and then for laws, and then repeatable patterns that could be observed, and then we could work in line with those. And the result of that, of course, is, well, your iPhone. So that's how it ends. So you say, well, that's pretty incredible. I thought that was all as a result of leaving Christianity. No, my friends, that is a result of Christianity. So we're going to find in the next couple of weeks some amazing foundational ideas, the way Jesus changed our minds about how we think about enlightenment, how we think about our relationship to the creation, how we think about science. And it all stems back to the man who hung on the cross. So I hope that this will be a great series for us to kind of ground our Christian worldview in and how we see Christian history, and for your friend to look at Jesus in a brand new light as the person who's responsible for all the things they hold dear. All right, so we'll see you guys this weekend as we explore more about how Jesus changed everything. See you this week.